A woman named Dorothy Scott was getting a bunch of creepy phone calls from an anonymous dude. This guy harassed her so much that she ended up signing up for karate lessons and even toyed around with the thought of buying a firearm. Despite her efforts, Dorothy disappeared, and people believe her mysterious phone stalker snatched her up. Her body was found 4 years later by a construction worker, but no one was able to figure out what happened, and her case remains unsolved to this day. Shall we dig in? Dorothy Scott was a 32-year-old single mom. She lived with her 4-year-old son at her aunt's home near Anaheim, California. Her baby daddy wasn't in the picture that we know of. Dorothy's parents lived in the area and would often watch her son, Sean, while she went to work. So Dorothy was working as a backroom secretary at 2 jointly owned stores. One was a cannabis and tobacco shop. The other was a psychedelic shop that sold incense and crystals and stuff. That's a pretty unique job. And what even is a backroom secretary? Sounds a little shady to me. Even though she worked at quirky shops that had a lot of personality, Dorothy had a pretty quiet one. One of her coworkers said she was as dull as a phone book. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about phone books. And damn, Dorothy's coworker is a savage, to just say that flat out. Some of Dorothy's other coworkers, friends, and family described her as dependable, kind, and introverted. She was a devout Christian homebody who didn't drink or use any substances. And at the time of her disappearance, Dorothy wasn't in a relationship that we know of. On the morning of May 28, 1980, Dorothy dropped Sean off at her parents' house before she went to work. She had a meeting at 9 o'clock that night for work, so she told her parents she wouldn't be back to pick up Sean until late. At the meeting, Dorothy's coworker, Conrad, wasn't doing too hot. He couldn't sit still, he was super sweaty, and had a big swollen rash on his arm that looked like it needed medical attention. Dorothy and her other coworker, Pam, decided to leave the meeting early so they could drive Conrad to the hospital. Since this was before the days of cell phones, Dorothy stopped by her parents' house to tell them what was going on and that she didn't know when she'd be back to pick up her son. She also changed her scarf. She had been wearing a black one at work and switched it out for a red one before going to the hospital. Which is so random. Why did she need to change scarves to go to the emergency room? And I guess it wasn't that urgent of an emergency if she felt the need to do that. Once they all got to the hospital, Conrad was brought to the back and Dorothy and Pam stayed out in the waiting room. The doctors determined that Conrad was bitten by a black widow spider. Well, good thing they brought him to the hospital. I mean, it was good for Conrad, not for Dorothy. Conrad was discharged at around 11 that night. He was also given a prescription to get filled. While Conrad and Pam got the prescription filled, Dorothy went to the bathroom and then told them she would go get her car and pull it up to the front of the hospital so they wouldn't have to walk too far. But that was her fatal mistake, because after that, Dorothy was never seen again. Once Conrad and Pam got the prescription filled, they went out to the front to wait for Dorothy. They stood out there for about 20 minutes until they saw Dorothy's car. It was speeding towards them with the headlights on full blast. Conrad and Pam waved their arms to try and get Dorothy's attention, but the car zoomed past them, skirted to the right, and drove out of the parking lot. The lights were so bright, Conrad and Pam said they couldn't even see who was in the car. At first, they thought there may have been an emergency with Dorothy's son or something. They ended up waiting at the hospital for a few hours to see if Dorothy would come back for them, but she never did. Wait, they willingly waited at the hospital after they were already discharged? I could never. Hospitals are the worst. One time, a nurse forced me to watch my mom give birth. I have never been the same since. So after Conrad and Pam waited outside and realized they had been stood up by Dorothy, they called her parents using the hospital phone. They asked if Dorothy ever came by to pick up Sean, but the parents said she never did. Uh-oh. Conrad and Pam then called the police to report their runaway chauffeur as missing. They still weren't that freaked out at this point. They were just more confused as to why Dorothy just up and left them without saying anything. About 5 hours after Dorothy was last seen, police officers found her station wagon. It had been set on fire in an alleyway about 10 miles away from the hospital. No one was inside. Ooh, okay, so things are starting to get freaky. Now, it looks like Dorothy got abducted and someone was trying to cover up their tracks. But who was it? Well, since Conrad and Pam couldn't really see who was driving in the car when it sped off, I'm guessing someone grabbed her in the parking lot and drove off with her in her own whip. Abducted in her own car. Yeah, that's what I'm going with right now. So after the whole burning car situation, officials turned up the heat on their investigation. Okay, maybe that was a bad choice of words, but you get what I mean. When officials talked to Dorothy's parents, they learned something pretty concerning. In the months leading up to Dorothy's disappearance, she apparently got a bunch of disturbing phone calls from an unknown man. Most of the time, the mysterious guy would call Dorothy to profess his love to her, but sometimes he would call and say he hated her and even threatened her a bunch. In one of his calls, the guy said, "When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you." That is terrifying. Why didn't she go to the police after getting a call like that? Another bad thing about this guy and his phone calls is that he knew way too much about Dorothy. He would call and tell her a lot of details about what she was doing each day, even down to the outfit she was wearing. It was obvious that this guy was physically stalking her in order to know all these specifics. In one of his calls, the guy told her to go outside and check her car. When she did, she found a shriveled up rose on her windshield. Whoa, what kind of weird message is this dude trying to send her? And he must have been right in that area to be able to put the flower on her car. Ugh, that's so creepy. Dorothy told her friends and family about her mysterious stalker. She said his voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't pinpoint where she recognized it from. And she apparently felt scared enough about the whole thing that she even started taking karate classes and thought about buying a Glock for protection. I hate that she had to do this. Like, why is our society so skewed that women have to learn martial arts and carry weapons to feel safe in their daily life? Shouldn't the police have been all over finding out who this dude was? Anyway, these calls definitely make it seem like someone was out to get Dorothy. And they didn't stop after she disappeared. A week after Dorothy was last seen, her mom got a call from who she believed was the same dude. When she picked up the phone, the dude asked, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" She said yes, and then he said, "I've got her." After that, he hung up. OMG, I would absolutely lose it if I was Dorothy's mom. And I wonder what would have happened if she said she wasn't related to Dorothy. Would the guy have just been like, "Oh, sorry, wrong number"? Or would he have still said the same thing? He probably had this call all planned out, and that would have thrown him way off. So the police tried to track down the guy from the call, but they were unsuccessful. They told Dorothy's parents to not talk to any journalists about their daughter's disappearance because it might negatively impact the investigation. But after about a week, Dorothy's dad couldn't resist. So he called the Orange County Register to talk about his missing daughter. Two things. One, I wonder why they thought them going to the press would be bad for her case. Were they trying to keep it all on the down low so they didn't freak out everyone else in town? Or were they trying to stay quiet and not give the perp clout because that's probably what he wanted? And two, why was the dad itching to be interviewed so bad? Please tell me he didn't look at his daughter's disappearance as his big break. That would be so bad. And things got even crazier after Dorothy's dad went to the press. The Orange County Register published a story in the paper about the details of Dorothy's vanishing. After that, the villainous phone caller gave the newspaper a ring. He talked to one of the editors over the phone and said, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." Whoa, hold up. This guy really just confessed all of that to an editor? And last time I checked, Dorothy's friends and family said she wasn't in a relationship. Maybe this dude had the wrong Dorothy. Or he was delusional and created a whole fantasy about being in a relationship with her. Or maybe Dorothy actually was in a secret relationship with this guy and didn't tell anyone. But that's not all. During his phone call with the editor, Dorothy's stalker dude also gave specific details about the night Dorothy vanished. He said He knew her coworker Conrad was bit by a spider that night. He also said Dorothy was wearing a black scarf at her work meeting and changed into a red scarf after that. Whoa. How would this guy know all of that? I kind of understand how he knew about the whole scarf thing because he had clearly been watching her, but how did he know about the spider bite? Did he pull Conrad's medical records or something? Oh, or maybe Conrad was her stalker. That would explain why the guy knew all of those details. But then who drove away in her car? Okay, I'm just making things confusing. Let's get back to the story. So this guy must have really loved making phone calls because he called Dorothys parents almost every Wednesday afternoon for 4 years straight. You'd think they'd block the dude at that point because that's so annoying. Oh, but I guess that would defeat the purpose of finding out more information about their daughter or her abductor. The police ended up installing a voice recorder at the parents' house to try and trace the calls, but the guy never stayed on the line long enough for them to get any leads. The creepy phone man specifically called when Dorothy's mom was home alone. But one day, in April of 1984, Dorothy's dad was home to answer the phone. Whatever her dad said was apparently enough to make the guy stop, because after that, he stopped ringing their phone until 4 months later. On August 6, 1984, a construction worker was going about his normal duties when he stumbled across a set of charred human and dog remains side by side. Talk about a memorable day at work. The bones were found at a construction site about 30 feet away from a road in Anaheim. A team of investigators were sent to the scene and determined the remains had been there for about 2 years. They believed they had been burnt in a fire that had previously swept across the site. Well, obviously they were burnt in a fire, duh. In addition to the remains, officials found a turquoise ring and a watch. Dorothy's mom confirmed the watch belonged to her daughter, and a week later, the dental records were confirmed to be a match for Dorothy. But we don't really know much about the dog remains that were found next to her. I'm trying to come up with a theory that would make sense for a dog to be there. Maybe it was the perp's dog? Or the mysterious slayer put the dog there to send some sort of demented message? It could have even been a weird coincidence for all we know. An autopsy was conducted on Dorothy's remains, but the medical examiner couldn't determine much since they were charred. But they did say there were definite signs of foul play. Later that month, a memorial service was held for Dorothy. But just when Dorothy's parents started to get some closure, the creepy man called again. OMG, get a life, bro! He called and asked, "Is Dorothy home?" Really, dude? I think you know the answer to that. Even after all of these calls, the police were still unable to find out any information about who was behind them. They did believe that whoever it was responsible for Dorothy's termination. The only real suspect investigated was Dorothy's baby daddy. But officials ruled him out due to the fact that he was in Missouri when all of this happened. Well, that wasn't enough juice for the people on the internet, so they came up with a suspect and theory of their own. And this is why I love the internet. These web-surfing true crime junkies believed Dorothy could have been abducted by a dude named Mike. He was a mechanic who worked near Dorothy's workplace, so he definitely could have known the details of her whereabouts and was around her enough for her to recognize his voice. He also had alternative religious beliefs and was described as an obscure man. But that still doesn't prove he executed Dorothy. No evidence was found to tie Mike to the case, and he ended up passing away in 2014. Now, it's been over 40 years since Dorothy's disappearance, and things are more confusing than ever. No one knows who made those calls or what happened to Dorothy. And the more time that passes, the more mysterious it all gets. Honestly, I blame the spider for all of this. If it never bit Conrad, none of this would have ever happened. Well, maybe it would, because Dorothy definitely had a crazy stalker man chasing after her. And how much did this dude spend on his phone plan? I don't know, but now that I've told you the full story, I'll leave it up to you to come up with your own theory. Who knows? Maybe you could be the one to solve this mysterious 41-year-old case. If you need me, I'll be eating these carrot cakes.